Around the world, millions face medical conditions that take away their ability to speak. Loved ones are left missing the familiar sound of their voice. 11 Labs is on a mission to help them reclaim it. Through our technology, we give people back the sound of themselves. In 11 films, here's some of those extraordinary people telling their stories in their own voice. 11 stories, 11 voices, 11 labs.
What did you think of me before I began to speak? I know on the outside I look very still, but on the inside I am always moving. When my mum and I went for walks through the parks, she explained the seasons to me. That tree is budding because it's spring, and in autumn we collected colourful leaves for me to draw at home. It was a good childhood. I always imagined I would grow up, marry and have children. Become a mum. I lived and loved and sang and danced. But in life you can't have good things without the bad. I'd had some tests at the hospital and now it was time for my diagnosis.
Motor neuron disease. Progressive, incurable, disabling, and terminal.
I kept looking at my shrinking left palm and was terrified of disability. The changes came rapidly. As I held my newborn baby at night, my mind raced with worry. I found it difficult to speak, especially at night or in a crowded room. My voice was quieter and my tongue struggled with the words in my mouth. And I felt off balance.
God, this is depressing, isn't it? Cheddar, you told me we were going to have fun, and I made them all cry. This is supposed to be a show full of drag queens. I don't know about you, but I want to have some fun. When things get really dark, you have to make your own light.
MND has been a difficult and transformative journey. I lost so much of the woman I thought I would be. But I discovered that inside me there were lots of other amazing people I could become. I've had experiences that I would have never had, met people that would have passed me by. I'm a full-time artist, and my work has been exhibited in galleries all over the world. My world is full of movement, excitement, and love. My voice was created from a home video of me with my daughter Aviva. I felt like crying when I first heard it, and my children, who couldn't remember my voice, were so happy slight this back, which I don't hate like I did before. I welcome it. Now Aviva is grown up and performing in my show. I don't need to walk, run, or even speak. I make magic with my gaze. I can do anything with my eyes, and I'm excited for what the future may hold.
Docuseries. This is 1 of 11. I've had the opportunity to view them all. So beautiful, and this one was selected because she's an artist, a creator, and we thought that would resonate with this crowd. So tell us a bit about the strategic and creative intention behind making a docuseries.
Absolutely. So from a creative standpoint, 11 Labs has always had the philosophy of the technology is not the hero, the technology supports the hero. And in this case, our heroes are 11 people. And so instead of talking about the newest voice models or product features, we really focus on the why this technology is important and what does it really mean to hear your own voice again. When we're thinking about this series, if we turn the clock back a little bit, this 11 Voices docu-series really starts with our Impact program, which I helped start 2 years ago. And in the beginning, this Impact program was really focused on helping people in the ALS community preserve and recreate their voices. And what we found was that not only was this really helping their communication, this was going far beyond communication. Even though we were really helping people to speak again, this was fundamentally changing their lives. If you are someone who has ALS, this is a muscle degenerating type of disease, and so at some point you might need to get a procedure called a tracheostomy, which means that you'll be able to breathe on your own again, you'll be able to speak again, and you have the opportunity to sign a waiver to say, I don't want to go through this. If my condition gets to that point, I don't want to continue to live. And a story that we kept getting back over and over at 11 Labs is that people would say they heard their 11 Labs voice, heard that they could be themselves again, and would change their mind and decided to live, decided to keep going. And one of the first stories I captured around this was a guy who's actually based here in Miami. His name was Jules Rodriguez, and he saw that his dream of being a stand-up comic was still there because he could say words and jokes in his own voice. And so he decided to continue living and shot a whole stand-up special with his 11 Labs voice, which is kind of how this whole thing began. And so when we were thinking about what we're going to create here and how we're going to showcase these stories, a 30 to 60 second ad spot could maybe talk about the technology, but really could never show the full depth of the human story behind it. And so we made a decision as a team that this really had to be a docuseries.
So you all have been around, this is just so beautiful, but you all have been around for 3 years, 4 years now?
3-4 years,
3-4
yeah.
years, yeah. And have scaled so rapidly, phenomenal growth, hockey stick growth. It's been a real huge success story in the industry. As you think about scaling, how do you think about accessibility? Sort of the cliche is always said about AI democratizes storytelling. I think saying it democratizes is a little bit of a bridge too far because as long as if you're not bringing all groups along, if you're not getting access, it's not quite democratization. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you think about accessibility, inclusion. This is a clear example of that, but how do you think about that and balancing that with scale?
For sure, absolutely. So when we think about storytelling at its core, this is one of the most fundamental human experiences that we have. Long before film and television and books, we had gatherings around a fire, listening to the bard, the orator, and in storytelling, at its core, there are two participants, the storyteller and the listener. And I think what scaling this technology does is it expands both. So if we're looking at the storyteller, you now can tell your story in your own authentic voice in over 70 languages, keeping the emotion and the tone and the cadence. And so therefore, it's reaching more people, more listeners are able to listen to those stories. And as a listener, the experience of stories is now expanded as well. Text can be brought to life with voice and sound design, and whether you have ability needs in the world of audio or you just prefer to learn more deeply with sound, I think the same stories can be experienced just so much more differently now and just so much wider. And if we're looking specifically at 11 Labs and our platform, we have the 11 Creative platform where as a storyteller, you can layer sound on top of compositions, on top of sound effects, really making a very immersive story in a way that if you've ever listened to a modern audiobook, a modern podcast, you know how powerful that can be. And these tools that we have for storytelling are just now more available to far more storytellers. And so if you're someone who doesn't have a suite of voice actors on hand, if you don't have a suite of composers at your disposal, you can still make these really beautifully fleshed out pieces of storytelling. And so at its core, I would say scaling this technology, it really opens up and expands who gets to tell stories, who gets to listen to them. And I think when you expand both sides of the storytelling equation, you are expanding which stories and experiences shape our culture as a whole.
Thank you. When you think about human performance and synthetic voice, how do you balance those? Where is human performance irreplaceable? Where do AI voices come in to augment? I know that this is a hotly debated topic in the industry. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Of course. Where is the fine line between robot and human? I think that when we're talking about AI audio, it's really powerful in two regards. In one, in prototyping creative, which is where I think it's the strongest, and then also in enriching your final product, your final production. So when you're prototyping a story, you have the ability to hear how it sounds just in real time. So you don't have to wait for a table read in order to hear how something sounds. You can test pacing, you can hear characters, and really refine. And then when it comes to the other side of it, the enhancing it, when you have a final product and you want to add, let's say you have a movie and you want to add background characters or background noise, or you want to add even the layer of agentic AI and having something that you can talk to in real time, I feel like those are little cherries on top. But I think where craft becomes irreplaceable is performance itself, because you have AI, right, that it can reproduce patterns in speech and tone and cadence it can approximate, but AI can't experience heartbreak, it can't experience joy, it cannot stand on a stage and perform in front of an audience, which is why live performance moves us, it's why theater gives us goosebumps, and that all comes from lived experience. AI can only combine ideas. It is a distinctly human ability to create new ones. And so I think that by having these tools, and the more powerful these tools become, the more valuable the human perspective becomes.
Thanks. And on the production side, can you talk a bit, I'm sure lots of people in the audience are using the tools, for some it may be something newer. How are independent filmmakers using the tools today? You mentioned a couple examples. How are studios using the tools today? Is there a case study or an example that you could share with the group today?
For sure. So for major studios, we're lucky enough to work with a lot of the big ones, Disney, Paramount, Netflix, and with them, I would say the most common use cases are the most practical. One of the most common right now is temporary voiceover. So when an editor is working on a series or a film, they typically need narration or dialogue long before the final voice actor comes in to record, and so it helps them shape the story very early on. We're also seeing a growing interest in the world of archival storytelling and preserving voices, so documentaries, not only having the subject being able to tell their story in their voice, but tell it in that decade. So having someone narrate the 20s era of their life with their voice that they had in their 20s or in their 50s. An example that I'm very excited about is the guy who made the Genius documentary on Netflix. His name is Cootie, fabulous guy. He's creating a documentary right now about an athlete and artist named Eddie Barnes. And Eddie Barnes left a lot of manuscripts behind. And so they're using his 11 Labs voice to help bring those words to life. And he's effectively telling his own story in his own voice and his own words, which I think is an amazing use case.
So for the room, creators, filmmakers, studio execs, how, for those who haven't yet started working in this space, how would you recommend that they start working with it responsibly? Are there programs that you have in place that they should get involved with, or you know, and what types of, what would you like people to come talk to you about after?
Of course, of course. So at 11 Labs, if you're planning to jump in, I highly recommend just diving into our Voices library that is fully licensed and ready to use. You can start testing dialogue and narration today. I also highly recommend using our music model. Our music model was primarily trained on cinematic score, and so it is a particularly powerful powerful tool for filmmakers. And then when it comes to using everything responsibly, I would say the most important piece of that is when you're creating a voice, making sure that you have the rights to that voice and making sure that the collaborators you're working with really understand how that voice is being utilized. And if you want to directly more work with 11 Labs, a great entry point, in my opinion, is our Impact Program, which you saw a little bit of it above, but through our Impact Program, we are helping support projects in the verticals of healthcare, education, and culture. And in that culture vertical, really focused on artists, on filmmakers, and cultural institutions. So if you have a project that you find really meaningful, that you're really interested to work on, I highly recommend coming and applying.
All right, we need to wrap up, but I think the last question I'm going to ask is, you all are working with Matt McConaughey?
Yes.
All right, tell us something about that we don't know already.
About Matthew.
About the project, how that came to be.
Yeah, I think...
It was not a question, it was a surprise question.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I think, about Hollywood in general is that everyone is actually very excited about audio AI and having their voice have an AI version of it, but nobody wants to talk about it publicly. So many studios,
So many let their voices talk about it.
But it's interesting. So I think that with Matthew, it was really surprising and delightful that he is really pushing forward, saying, "Hello, I want to use this" in the public front. I think that was like a huge win for us.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.